Hello, Chris. Thank you for sharing this and joining to this exercise. Uh, if it's okay for you, we will begin. So, what is for you your understanding of this principle called that we could call centering or verticality or grounding, depending what word is more resonating for you?
When I speak to Aikido, I use the mastery of the sword of attention as the metaphor for the practice. I see Aikido as the practice of mastery with the sword of attention.
Mm.
Um, and I think Aikido uniquely is a practice that opens attention. It opens attention into awareness. And through the direct somatic experience of our own awareness, we actually open into consciousness itself. Uh, you could say Aikido is the practice of unifying consciousness or unifying with the unified field of consciousness. Uh, my my approach to this is based on an assumption that Aikido enables us to explore the immediate experience of unitive awareness, and that allows for the compassionate leadership in the world and the intuitive navigation of complex, accelerating change.
Mm.
I would hold that Aikido enables us to open our attention into the larger field of awareness beyond ourselves. You're expanding, I would ring to, I would say, opening attention into awareness, our energy field expands. We open awareness into consciousness itself, and that is awakening. Uh, my own experience with Aikido has come through Richard Moon, who created a open laboratory of inquiry into the nature of Aikido. Uh, it was an Aikido dojo, but it was also this open inquiry environment. And I've been in that practice ever since, Aikido as open inquiry. I would hold that the critical principles of Aikido are presence, you could say centering, harmony, harmonious relationship. But by that I mean unity, because the purpose of, or the meaning of harmony is to unify. Harmonize is to unify.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the third principle that's how to say this, unify into co-creation, you could say, relationship. But that opens then to what I'd hold as the third principle of Aikido, and that is not knowing.
Mm.
The release of um, the persona and the knowing that goes with the persona into the field of chi, or to become one with your partner is to become one with chi, the key. We're both key. We're all this energy. So my perception of what O-sensei was up to was that he was facing the dilemma of an attack. He would drop his persona and release into his awareness into the larger field of identity as energy,
Mm.
and become one with his partner. And it was over at that point.
Yeah.
There was no, what did he say? Everything you see in Aikido is dust after the fact. it happens in energy before it manifests in the physical.
Yeah.
So that's really what my orientation is. The use of attention to, we could say, recenter consciousness, or recenter our awareness from out in the world into our own, for the moment we'll say, into our own body, or into our own location, let's call it that.
Yeah.
Our own personal location. And to dive into, immerse ourselves in the living presence of the body, of the somatic experience, the sensory awareness of the presence. But where Aikido helps is that not to end there, not to stop there. So we presence ourselves into center, and we would say the chi expands. When you release to the center line, the chi expands of its own nature, not because you have to extend it. If you release through your center, the chi as awareness expands out.
Yeah.
To include whatever you imagine is out there.
You don't have anything to do. You release.
There's nothing to do but let go.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to do but actually be accountable for our attention, bring it back out from the world into our own being, and play whatever sensory playful practice you can through breath and otherwise to deepen into your own presence, to deepen into the center of presence. And then to release through that presence into open awareness that is larger than the body, that is not bound by the body, it's not bound by the mind or the world. That Aikido is a way to open through recollecting attention into the center, to then release that agency of centering and let go, release the body.
Yeah.
In that deepening of release, we experience the surge of the chi. And I study with Nado. The basic practice is open to the energy. If you face a critical situation, you'll be given the energy to deal with it. But you have to open up big enough to allow it to come through and serve. And if you crimp on it, if you clench, then you experience suffering.
Yes, I guess I can imagine at least what you just explained now, and I appreciate because it's quite open and wide. But how would you explain this to just a person who's just coming for the first time and say, what do you mean by letting go of this center and this energy? Do I have to work for years, or is it possible to experiment this more quickly or in a different way?
So I mentioned earlier, the edge of my practice right now is to explore the immediate experience of unitive awareness. The immediate experience is already present to us.
Mm-hmm.
It's what witnesses all of this. Unitive awareness witnesses manifestation. I think Aikido is a doorway to the immediate experience of unitive awareness.
How is it different from mindfulness practice?
Well, I like to say it's mindfulness off the pillow. It's mindfulness in the midst of the melee. It's why I trained. I was doing crisis counseling without any training for it. And I was years into it, and I was in over my head. And I saw a guy doing Aikido and thought, like that. He was doing a randori, and I thought, yeah, like that. That's the only way I'm going to survive this. So I took up Aikido as self-defense, that is, defense of myself in the midst of critical life situations. Anyway, it's because of Moon, Richard Moon, I came into Aikido as an open inquiry process, not a set of techniques or even a set of principles. It was more, come in here into this lab and let's get into the energy and let it move us around and teach us Aikido.
Yes, and so it's a way to managing crisis, for example, without getting lost in action.
Which has been the value that I've seen in the business world over the years. But even holding that the principles and even a practice of Aikido is presence into a larger harmonious resonance with the field, into a willingness to now let go of my Aikido and who's doing it, and give over to the awareness that is manifesting all of this. That doesn't take any time. That's simply what happens in between our thoughts. It's already present to us. Unity of awareness is our womb, is the the source of all of this being and doing and having and getting and stuff. And so I'm extremely, I'm extremely interested in setting aside our sequential practices with the goal of getting whatever it is we think we're going to get by practicing. And simply releasing into the breath of the present as unitive awareness. And then consider engaging in the world that is extending back out. But from there, from greater awareness, in the direct experience of greater awareness, as greater awareness, as the consciousness that sources awareness itself. I play with the difference between awareness and consciousness and hold awareness as a function of human capability or faculty, as well as other beings. But consciousness is what manifests awareness. It's a false dichotomy, but it's helpful. So Aikido develops unitive awareness. Aikido develops through process, through sequential training and sequential practice, the ability to get better and better at dropping into unitive consciousness no matter what's going on.
What does it mean when, for example, you take an example of somebody who's working in an organization, is just enter a meeting, it should be a normal routine meeting, and then suddenly somebody is attacking or criticizing what's happening. So you are always ready, or what do you do with this kind of sudden or surprised? What's happening?
I was graced with the invitation to help start a company in San Francisco back in the 80s. It was one of the first Cellular One companies, mobile phone companies. And the reason I was invited was because the crisis counseling I had been doing included an executive who was in trouble, whom I helped deal with his PTSD from Vietnam. It was destroying his family and life. So I got him, this was a confidential counseling service that I ran. So I got him into counseling, I got him into support, to do the tracing work that we all have to do with our shadows, to get at least in part a sense of what got him there.
Mm-hmm.
But secondly, I turned to him and I said, you know, I refer you to the guys that can do the psychological work. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have that training. But I'm involved in a training that I think would make a difference for you. From what you've told me about your combat experience, you're addicted to the rush.
Mm.
You're addicted to the adrenaline. God only knows what other chemicals hit you. This guy had flown 1,000 sorties as a medevac pilot. Most of these men were dead at 300 sorties. They had giant red targets on their ships. And they chose whether or not, they had the choice whether or not to arm the medevac pilots. He chose not to arm. I have other stories that I won't bother with right now, but this gentleman's name is Jim Dixon. And he got into Aikido with us. What I said to him was, look, you want the rush? We'll get you the rush. Just get your ass on the mat with us. How about a sword? Will that do? You want some rush? Come on in.
Yeah.
Come over to the lab. So he came in and he started to train with us. And at a certain point, he said to Moon, you're not teaching. He said, I get it. Now, I couldn't figure it out the first times I started to work with you, but now I get it. You're not teaching. You're learning out loud. So Jim stayed. He turned around his life, and in 2 years, got chosen to be the head of this startup. Jim just passed this last year, just before COVID hit. And I saw him before he left us. We ended up making a 15-year run through the build out of the wireless industry with him on point. And we invited Moon in as one of the players. So it was Richard Moon and myself and this guy, Jim Dixon. And we built billion-dollar companies. And at the core of what we did were the principles of Aikido and the practice of it in the senior teams without falling. Slow motion Aikido. In retreat settings, whenever we did a strategy session, we did Aikido on the lawn. When we formed Cellular One San Francisco, we stepped into a declaration of the impossible together. Mm-hmm. And that declaration was to build the most sophisticated system in the wireless industry that had ever been attempted in half the time it had ever been done, and not lose a family.
Yeah.
When Jim hired me to work with him, the job description was, you're here to prevent casualties. He made a declaration for a high-performing, caring culture.
Yeah.
This is 1985. And we used Aikido to bring that about. We taught slow motion Aikido to everyone in the organization, and we used it in our retreats as a source of intuitive guidance in relationship to how we strategize the movement of the company in the industry. this goes missing even in much of the leadership development work that's being done with Aikido out there. We had a unique experience to create a company that was very successful around the principles of Aikido, and to use both Aikido as physical dialogue and dialogue as verbal Aikido.
Yeah.
So we studied with Bohm, and we brought Bohm's dialogue into these teams as a way of discourse and a way of practicing verbal Aikido.
Yeah.
So we posit a question at a strategy retreat for the strategy, and we'd work on it for a while, kind of dump out what our assumptions were with the dialogue. Then we go outside and we'd do Aikido for an hour or two. Then we'd come back in and go, what did we get out there that informs this question?
So the physical dimension was really essential.
Yeah, I've seen it. We've turned around a multi-$100 million call it a team accountable for hundreds of dollars of production, who foundered because of the internal conflict that they were having. So I met with them in retreat, and I said, I've interviewed you guys. As far as I can tell, you're all playing poker with each other. And if you think you're going to build a $2 billion company playing poker with each other, you don't need me. Good luck. If you're interested in actually unifying, finding a unified field of commitment, then I think I can help. So they invited me in, and we did Aikido for a morning, slow motion Aikido, and investigated the three principles. They made the decision to go forward together in a whole new way, using dialogue and the centering, because they were under big pressure. They had stopped the manufacturing line of a big chip manufacturer because of their own conflict. And the lights were on, and the senior management was all over them. So it was a very high pressure situation.
Yeah.
But they turned that around, and that's happened with other teams along the way, where the Aikido has become such an incredibly powerful metaphor for how to be with each other. More importantly, how to be with yourself, and how to actually begin to come into harmony with your own shadow, with your own conditioning, with your own tapes, or whatever you want to call the programming of the persona.
So this is really disarming the aggressivity or the violence or the competition spirit in a certain way, or not?
It doesn't lower competition, say it. It increases the esprit de corps. It it ensures friendly competition, supportive competition. Competition originally meant to strive together. So competition in that sense, yes, like athletes boosting each other.
Yeah.
But not in any way cutting key, not in any way crossing over each other, or competing against one another.
Yeah.
More like a track team where everybody's got their own athletic thing, but you're not competing with the other members of your own team.
And so when, because for so far I know a little bit about Bohm's dialogue, so it's a kind of opening to just include the other so I can hear them. And so
Oh,
that's the condition for co-creating that you were mentioning in the beginning.
yeah, I'm reminded of a session that we did with a senior team of World Disney. This is years ago. Um, and they were delightful. We spent a day with them, and in the morning we said we're going to do some Aikido. In the afternoon we'll sit in dialogue. So center first, and then drop in, get the energy, and then let it serve the dialogue. So we got some mats, and the senior team shows up, and they're all in bright white, brand new gis with Mickey Mouse patches on them. So we do Aikido all morning. Again, this is slow motion. We can demonstrate. We're in gis. We're in our hakamas. We have swords. We're there full game, and and they're in their gis. But we're not trying to teach them to roll. We're just doing Aikido movement all morning, and we introduce the play with a randori. We do a slow motion randori that before we taught anything, before we do anything, we put them in a slow motion randori and let them play a little bit. There's enough pressure from 4 people on one that they get symbolics, and their shadow gets triggered.
Mm.
So just enough, kind of playful, and then they take feedback from their teammates that are in the randori with them. What was their style? What was their fallback? When things got hot, what patterns did we see? How did it feel? Okay, then we start teaching presence.
Yeah.
How does this feel?
Mm.
And we work with all the basic tools of beginning Aikido to teach centering and grounding and opening and sensing and sensing an approaching partner, walking across the, so get the field of relational field, sensing. It's all attention training, and it's using Aikido in slow motion and more and more challenge to enable them during the day, or the morning in this case, to gain some sense of their own center and ground and some ability to get off the line and get with stuff.
Mm.
And even a sense that stepping off the line is stepping into a larger field of power and awareness that holds an accountability of loving protection, because you will immediately gain an advantage.
Yeah. And when you speak,
Aikido is letting go of that advantage.
when you speak about stepping out of the line, and it was a question I wanted to ask you, is about all this kind of practice and sharing and dialogue, etc. Okay, when it is confronted with vulnerability feeling, if the people feel threatened, it cannot work. What can you do then in this
People
sense?
threatened by the experience of their own body, by the sensation of their own body. They've been told not to do that.
Yeah.
To say nothing of our emotional, I'll say persona again.
Yeah.
So I was actually trying to catch this story of, well, I'll let it go with these companies over and over have found that using these principles and practicing them both verbally and physically enables these senior teams to navigate highly complex change environments in a non-competitive, winning way.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of strategy again, because I was trying to get that on the board, and it's The way we used Aikido as strategy at Cell 1 San Francisco was that we had a $30 million company to build in 2 years. And we were going up against $1 billion company that had already captured the market. They had 2-year head start, and they had stores all over the city, and they were selling their phones and their Signal, which is what we represented. And so we had to come up with some Aikido. This is David and Goliath, man. So we thought, well, what would we do if this were Aikido? And what came through that inquiry was something we learned in a randori together, which most folks in Aikido have learned, which is in a multiple attack, one of your options is to simply step to the space where they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And that, interestingly enough, entrains everything, right? This is the bold step into greater power, but not against anybody, not even dealing with anybody, just going to I'll call it to your sweet spot over there in the open space, to operate from a deeper domain of awareness than you were in before you made that jump. So this is this step off the line into openness. When we took on that company, we realized that they had built all these stores, and so the retail thing was really happening, and on top of it, they had advertising dollars we couldn't compete with. So we thought, well, okay, we'll let them advertise cellular. We don't have to advertise it. They're doing it for us. We don't have to take them on and open a bunch of retail stores that are late. So while we were building the system in the first year and a half, we were also building up relationships with secondary distributors of electronics equipment,
Mm-hmm.
all over the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And sure enough, when we opened our doors at 1 year and 3 quarters or something like that, we had 70% of the market on day one, because we went where they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And it was purely out of Aikido and
Yeah.
our practice of Aikido that we did so. We also stepped into this declaration of speed, which meant we would have to do this whole thing, if we were going to do it in half the time, in a way that had never been done before. That's where the deep dialogue, now we combine the two, deeply presenced dialogue, in which you're spending quality time in silence together for its own sake, but also in a question.
Mm-hmm.
So that our experience with Bohm was that he recognized Aikido as physical dialogue, let me put it that way. He was tickled by what we showed him. We used dialogue for vulnerability. We used it for creativity, and we did open dialogue. We did Bohmian dialogue. We did all of those, depending on which kind we needed. We also did debate and argument for closure and closing processes consciously. We were very conscious in our decision-making process about what tool we were using for what outcome. But it was all informed by deeply presenced dialogue or discussion. You asked about a meeting, just to wander a little bit. When Jim Dixon, the guy that we developed, who developed us, when he walked into a crisis meeting where people were like at each other and it wasn't happening, it's, and they're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
So Dixon would come in, fairly heavy set guy, would come in and he would sit down and he'd drop in, close his eyes and drop in. And they'd go on for a while. And then he'd say, I think it'd help if you asked this question. I don't hear anyone asking this question. Then he'd get up and leave.
Wow.
Total leader by inquiry.
Uh-huh.
He would draw by inquiry, draw them into a domain they hadn't been attending to.
Yeah.
He'd open their attention. He did Aikido. First, he opened his, so that he, you could say, unified with their field by dropping into the energy through his own presence, and then sensing that field. Here's what was needed. Here's what needs to be spoken. Here's the question that's not being asked. That's what arose intuitively for him. He was an intuitive leader. He'd been trained in 1,000 sorties, 90% of which were hot combat and non.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yes, and when I lost my question. So it is about this not knowing you were talking in the beginning also. By inquiring is just accepting not knowing and asking the people to express, or is it just a way to let the energy of other people come in?
Well, I think both, but the not knowing is the edge of innovation. It's where innovation can and does happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the domain of paradox and intuitive jumps. It comes out of the declaration of the impossible as probable. It comes out of, we used our presencing practice to stand up in front of our senior team members and speak our declarations for what we would achieve in the next 3 months to a year. This was in the context of dialoguing on what's mission critical for the next quarter. We declared for our results, and we either made promises, which were guarantees, or stretch commitments, which we're kind of clear how we can do this, but we got to collect some resources. Mm-hmm. To a breakthrough, which was, I don't know how the hell I can pull this off. I don't have the resource. I don't know where we're going to get the resources, and I declare for it. I'm going to do this anyway. Mm-hmm. We were very good at refining in our dialogue the senior team's ability to know when individually and as a group they were declaring for promises, stretches, or breakthroughs. We were very conscious about what it meant to stretch beyond a stretch, that is, to jump to a breakthrough. Mm-hmm. So an example of the breakthrough was this commitment not to lose a family in the face of a two-year startup environment, in which we were going to do a miracle, which was build the most sophisticated system in the industry in half the time. The way that manifested was I met with the spouses of the senior team every quarter. I met with the spouses of the senior team and the senior team every quarter as part of our retreat process. We went through this process as a community, and we shared the vulnerabilities that our families were experiencing and the fears. You know what a ropes course is?
Yeah.
It's where you gear up and you go up in the trees, and they do it for team building and cooperation.
Yeah.
It's kind of a safe risk environment.
Yeah.
We went through that with the spouses.
Wow.
it was all a metaphor for what was much more difficult, which was what we were actually going through. So we used a lot of simulation, and Aikido was one of our primary simulation tools. We could simulate a conflict between a vendor and one of our senior team members. We'd play it out in a randori. This was all a somatic lab, and what Moon and I got invited into was a visionary leader's understanding of Aikido and how it might manifest in the company. So we fulfilled the declaration. We knocked the socks off the wireless industry, and we went on to build out regions of Macau, multiple cities, as a senior team. And then he got picked to start Nextel. And we went on to build Nextel over the next 10 years. I was invited into 2 other companies who were vendor companies. One built all the physical logistics for a cellular system, and the other was the microwave engineering company. They saw what we were doing because they were our vendors and invited Moon and I into their companies, so that over a 12-year period, we had 3 companies whose cultures were based in Aikido, working together as the most accomplished build-out team in the nation. Mm-hmm. We broke world records every year. They were our records. That was Aikido in action.
So
off the pillow.
Yes. So efficiency is not definitely in opposition with harmony.
No, on the contrary.
Because we very often see this kind of being harmony, and it puts you in a kind of ecstatic state where nothing is moving.
Ecstatic state. I don't know about ecstatic state, but I'm clear that harmony represents the nature of consciousness.
What I mean is also the fact that combining the yin and the yang, the receiving and the giving, this kind of balance.
What about it?
It's not only just this harmony. Sometimes is assimilated to yin state, waiting, receiving.
Oh, now I'm getting it. Well, when we teach leaders, when we're working with leaders, I recently worked with an innovation team of one of the top 5, top 3 consulting firms in the world. And this is the team that leads their innovation experiment. They have innovation labs, digital labs all over the world, and they use them to design company transformations, digital transformations of companies, as well as cultural transformations of companies. These folks are definitely on the edge of the transformational process in action. My own experience with them is that they, like most teams who are out on the edge, lack the somatic dynamics that they need. Mm-hmm. So I was invited in to help them with that, and so we did some Aikido together. And I was working with the leader and put him in a randori. It's slow motion, pressure enough, thank you, randori. And his issue was overblending. So he had learned that from me, learned the blend, but he would still defer. Mm-hmm. So what we had to work on was the sword cut.
Yeah.
One without the other isn't sufficient. Unless, in fact, you have the willingness to cut, you won't find the harmony.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I attend to that. What I'd really like to say to all of this as I wander around in these stories is that the common thread for me has been the awakening of awareness, and the awakening of awareness through mastery with our own attention, mastery with awareness of what we're doing with our attention, and the use of attention to deepen awareness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Use of attention to deepen into and dissolve into awareness.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I think O-sensei did.
Yeah, yeah. Just one precision. What about the kind of intention about creating a more harmonious world in more general? So the question of, is there really an ethics, or is just harmony useful for being efficient? You see the difference? Is there a final goal, a wider vision, or about?
Again, I'd say harmony is the nature of consciousness.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the nature of human awareness, but intrinsically the nature of consciousness itself. It's not something to be achieved, it's something to be recognized as what's so in our being, what's already so.
Yes, it's okay. And because sometimes we see in other approaches or techniques or tool sets or whatever the practice that can be proposed, that they say, yes, we are just proposing a tool, and a tool doesn't need an ethics, but you are at a higher level of
ethic. Ethics are a function of human awareness.
Mm-hmm.
They are a posit in the dual mind.
Yeah.
Ethics are a reflection of the compassion of unitive consciousness.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for me it's really clear and really interesting is that you say it comes as such, like you were saying in the beginning. When you release, energy is flowing. You don't have to make an effort, so you don't have to stick ethics because it's already in the
just
awareness.
As harmony is already happening.
Yes,
harmony is already so. It's already happening. I mean, try watching nature for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, for 10 minutes. I was saying earlier that what I'm now playing with is, instead of assuming that we have to engineer a set of sequential practices and then apply those practices to get a change result, is all waza. It's all playing within the limited mind. It's all a function of dual mind.
Yeah.
So if you're playing in dual mind, in the world of the dual mind, it helps to know the seat of your identity. If you think the seat of your identity is in the dual mind, you are troubled.
Yeah.
Because that's what generates troubledness. Mm-hmm. If you seat your identity in unlimited consciousness, beyond human unitive awareness, if you seat your identity in consciousness itself, and then imbue your dual persona in its service, now you got Aikido.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's so clear. You when you explain it like this, it's just this kind of it's in the nature itself of the process or of the practice. So you don't have to stick a layer upon the practice because it's already in there.
So let's go back. Let's go back to World Disney. So we spend the morning doing Aikido. We have fun, and they get to throw us around, even though we're not throwing them around. And we're demonstrating Aikido as well as doing slow motion movement with them. And they've gotten the direct experience of centered presence. They've gotten a sense of energy field they've played with, this approach. They've practiced blending with different slow motion attacks like a punch or a grab. They've played. And we've played with presence, and we've played with harmony, and we've played with not knowing. And now these days, at the end of these 1 or 2 day sessions, we'll put them back in the randori at the end of the day, so that they can see what's transpired for them, what transformed for them from their morning randori to their afternoon randori.
Mm-hmm.
But at World Disney, we only had a morning, but we got them into the direct experience of the inquiry into these domains of presence, harmony, and we'll call it creative not knowing. Then in the afternoon, we came in and we sat down. They were still in their gis, we were too, and we had a dialogue. We had a circle, and we had a dialogue. And within about half an hour, someone had, surprisingly to everyone, shared that his wife had cancer. And within about a half an hour after that, we had understand when we do these dialogue circles, we drop into deep presence before we go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's our basic message to leaders. I'm more interested in where you're coming from than where you're going. So the basic for this was breath, working with them with breath, and dropping in, and then moving into what's up for you now that we have this morning of Aikido. What's going on for you and the nature of this team? So this was actually a dialogue for vulnerability, reflective dialogue focused on us. So what do we see about us? What do we want to do about us, about what we see? And as I mentioned, this guy mentioned his wife. And within another half hour, as I said, they had found themselves engaging in a conflict that had been underlying their team and their work for a year without resolution. This is not something we were asked to do. This is something that arose out of being in deep presence with each other. And the disturbance, the energetic disturbance of a morning of Aikido. So the field was dynamic that we dropped into, if that's making sense. The leader said later that they resolved it. They found their solution to that conflict. And he said, it's the fastest I've ever seen us engage a conflict and come out with what we needed to do. These stories are my examples of what happens when you invite a group of people to dance in Aikido and then let them engage whatever challenges they're facing from that experience. And and to begin to develop, as we did in these teams, both team and individual mastery practice.
Mm-hmm.
What were they doing for their internal Aikido? And it didn't matter what their version was, yoga and tennis and a talk with my wife once a week. But everybody was developing a mastery practice. So that mastery practice was, what are you doing for centering? What are you doing to play in harmony? What's the tool you're trying this quarter or this time?
Mm-hmm.
What are you working on? When we stood up and made commitments about the results we would produce in the company, for the company, in the next quarter, we not only spoke to those results, mm-hmm. but we declared for our own development result, what we were doing based on the feedback we'd gotten from the team to shift our game personally. Might be one guy was go back to church, another guy was take up running, another guy it was whatever.
Yeah.
I'm trying to describe an environment that Aikido produced.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Of personal and team inquiry, using the call it the randori of business, of high intensity, high complexity business, as a way to practice Aikido.
Yeah.
As the mat.
Yeah, and I think these are really good example to illustrate what just your intention, how you translate in your practice and your going with these companies are a really good example. Yes, thank you very much for all these wonderful and very interesting, very stimulating.